Hey guys, we are in chapter 20, lesson 2. We are continuing our discussion about the Renaissance. Remember, the Renaissance is the rebirth in learning about the Greek and Romans. And so this will continue, this will be our continued theme throughout the chapter. Humanism. European scholars developed a new way of thinking about the world. It was based on the Greek and Roman ideas. It gave importance to the individual and society, gain knowledge through reason, and encourage people to be active in their cities and develop their talents. Remember, we were talking about Florence, and we were talking about Venice and all of the extra money that existed in these cities. So they were able to pay for artwork, and they were able to pay for people to develop their talents because we're past the Black Death. We're past when people were sad and when they didn't have jobs. And so now people have money to pay for these things. So it encouraged people to be active in their cities, develop their talents, really reason through things and not just believe things because people tell them. It's true. Your famous humanists were Francisco Petrarch, which studied famous Roman writers and wrote biographies of other famous Romans. He traveled to monasteries looking for old manuscripts. Right here would be an example of an old manuscript. So they would take these manuscripts, and we will be talking in just a second about printing them into books. But right now, books don't exist. So you're going to have to actually handwrite all of these manuscripts. So they would actually transfer them so that you were able to actually read them. The largest library at the time was right here in the Vatican. If you can see the beautiful ceiling in that picture. The largest library of the time was in Vatican City. And the Vatican, remember, it's the country that's inside of Rome. So that's a picture of their library. So these manuscripts would be stored in the libraries like the one you just saw in the Vatican. Humanist writers during the Renaissance wrote in the vernacular. So the vernacular is the common language of the land. So if you were a scholar, most likely you spoke Latin. But they wanted people to be able to read. So the importance of why people wanted things in the vernacular was if it wasn't in the language of the people, you wouldn't be able to read it. It's kind of like today, if I gave you something in Latin to read, nobody would know how to be able to read that. So I'd have to give it to you in English. So that was kind of why there was a big push during this humanist time period that just because you were a scholar and educated, you wanted to write things where people could actually read them and understand them. Dante Alighieri wrote the Divine Comedy, one of the world's greatest poems. This poem is about a person's journey from heaven to hell. And Geoffrey Chaucer wrote Canterbury Tales about a pilgrim's journey to the town of Canterbury. We're not going to concentrate too much on the writing because there's so many big important topics in this chapter. Gutenberg's printing press. Johann Gutenberg was a German printer. He invented the first printing press to use movable metal type. I know that you're thinking that when we talked about China, we talked about the woodblock printing. The Chinese had already invented the printing press with movable type, but their language has so many characters for this to be effective because you'd have to print out. It would be too difficult to print out into something the size of a book. Using that method. So I have a video that is attached on the website. It's a short video, but it really shows you what the printing press was. This is a picture of the printing press, but the video that I have for you shows a lot more. It's like a kid interview, so it's kind of interesting, but it actually shows you how that metal type and in order to answer the questions on the homework, you need to watch the video because not ever all the answers to the homework is in the lecture. Some of it's in the video as well. So we're going to flip back to the notes. So books were much more available because before you'd have to write out, just so you saw in that manuscript, you'd have to write everything out. Now that you were able to print it, books were much more available and people were actually learning to read. There was a large amount of the population was illiterate. And so now that the books are more available, more people are able to read. And the very first book that was printed on the new press was the Bible. There is one of the Gutenberg Bibles is actually in the Huntington Library in Pasadena. A few years ago, we were able to take a field trip there to see it, which was pretty cool. Also a copy in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. Those aren't the only two copies, but those are the two copies that I've seen personally. So what effects does humanism have on society? So remember, humanism is asking you to actually think and to reason why things work, why things happen, why we believe certain things. Leonardo da Vinci, remember he's known for The Last Supper and the Mona Lisa. He cut open dead bodies to learn about the human body. And he wrote, it's called Da Vinci's Sketchbook. And in this sketchbook, let me flip it over here. He would do things. So back in the day, they did not have x-rays. So he would cut dead bodies, and he actually drew this picture in order to be able to see where all of the organs are. So that people would actually, in surgery, use Leonardo's sketchbook to see where the organs are. I cannot picture anything more scary than to have somebody operate on me on a picture. But that was what was happening back then, because that's all they had.